Hi, my name is Karen Eifler, and I'm an instructor in the School of Education here at the University of Portland. The Teaching and Learning Collaborative is putting together this series of videos to help instructors all over the campus solve some of the tricky and banal problems that we all face as teachers trying to make our subject matter accessible to students and help them remember it. And what I'm going to talk just for a few minutes about is the idea of hooks. And in the language of my discipline, a hook is actually called an anticipatory set. And it's what we do in the first few minutes of a class to get the ball rolling. We all know that every lesson should have a strong beginning, middle, and end. One of the things we don't always think about is the importance of those first few minutes. And so when I say a hook, I mean these really are strategies to engage students. And sometimes people ask, why should I bother with doing a hook or devising an anticipatory set? And there's three reasons. One is it helps to focus your students on the subject that you're about to dive into. We need to keep in mind that just as we're busy, students are changing gears and changing codes and cultures several times throughout the day. So they might be on their way into your ethics class, and they've just finished their biology class, and those are two really different ways of looking at the world, and they also have what's ever going on in their lives outside of school. So it's really a great investment to take a couple of minutes to be deliberate about starting the class with a hook. It also is a way to focus attention, and one of the things we know about how the brain works is that if we're not paying attention to something, it doesn't matter how brilliant it is, we're not going to be remembering it as well as we might. So it's a way really to cue our brain, our students' brains, that they need to be paying attention. And then the other thing, of course, is to arouse our interest. Give a purpose for being in the class for these 50 minutes or this hour and a half, or God forbid, a 7 to 10 in the evening class. There are three kinds of hooks that I think about. One is a mood hook, and that might be exactly what it suggests, setting a tone for the class. Those might be things like having a piece of music playing in the background as students are coming in and getting settled, that somehow evokes what it is that you're going to be talking about that day. Music has an enormous capacity to arouse different emotions and different ways of thinking in our mind, and so you know that dun 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 dun, nothing good is going to happen or nothing happy is going to happen, and our brain is already starting to process information based on the kind of music that we're listening to. So finding pieces of music that somehow evoke concepts close to what we're talking about is one strategy. You can play it on your iPhone, you can play it on a CD player, you can play it on the computer, you can hum it if you want to. Other times I like to use evocative images or paintings or just colors that are on the screen or on the board, and it's not too hard to go to Google Images. I've put in bizarre concepts like democracy or anticipatory set, and just see what happens when you put those images in. And one of the things that we know, it's a cliche, but that a picture is worth 1,000 words. The reason that's true is that when we're looking at pictures, unlike when we're looking at words or even listening to words, many parts of our brain are fired up and receptive. And so having a picture or some kind of image on the board, even if you say nothing about it, is actually transforming students' brains and shifting them into sort of an aura of receptivity and attention. So images, music, and another one might be a poem or an aphorism that you have on the board that connects students to what it is that you're about to teach. So those are some ideas for setting a mood. You may or may not build on them directly. Let's say that you wanted to have a different kind of hook where you didn't want to just waste the poem or waste the image. Then you might think about engaging in action hooks, ways to get students actively engaged in something before you dive into the meat of your lesson. So you could turn the music or the image or the sentence or the bit of poetry into a prompt that students need to respond to. What are three things this picture reminds you of? What are three adjectives you might apply to this poem? What kind of mood do you have here in in the music that's playing, and maybe that ties into what it is that you're about to teach. You might have a question that you want them to solve. You might have a headline from the Wall Street Journal or Fox News or People Magazine or the Oregonian that taps directly into the ideas and skills that you'll be teaching in your course or for that day, and ask them, what does this remind you of? It's sometimes we forget the people like me who were born before the earth was cooling. Students don't always pick up the newspaper and read it in the morning, which is not to say that they're illiterate about what's going on in the world. It's just, it's a different source of material. And so if your eye is captured by something on your way into school, over the weekend, you might consider using that as a prompt to get a conversation started, or to get students engaged in solving a problem that taps into the knowledge and skills that you're teaching in your class. And then just two more kinds of hooks. One would be a response hook, and that's really and truly, in the old days we might have called that, let's get out your homework and grade it. It's taking a problem directly related to their homework or to what you've been talking about this week, and ask them to complete an open-ended sentence, or to circle the problem that gave them the most trouble when they were working on it at home. And then perhaps rather than going through all of the problems in the homework, you take a quick poll and find out which of the 20 problems that the class worked on did most people struggle with. And then you wind up debriefing over number 2 and not having to go through all of them. So I'm not sure that's a hook in the same way that I was talking about previously, but it's a way to connect what they were doing yesterday or before they came into your class to what you're about to embark in. Because again, I think we really need to be mindful with students of how complicated their lives can be as they move from course to course, from job to student, from women friends to men friends, to the drama of their dorm and home lives, to their commute. All of those things are things that they might be well paying attention to when they come into our class. That's really important and really well prepared. But if they're not paying attention, and if we don't do something to hook them into that sequence, it really won't matter how brilliant we are. The last kind of hook that I've been playing around with in the last couple of years is actually the hook of silence. I found this quote from a monk from the 7th century, and you'd think there wouldn't maybe have been a lot of distractions living in the desert in the 7th century, but Isaac of Nineveh said that silence is the thing that will free you from the phantoms of ignorance. And I know most instructors would love their students to be freed from the phantoms of ignorance, and sometimes being as deliberate as saying, we're going to take 92 seconds to just drop what has been happening on our way into the class and focus our minds, now that we're here in Philosophy 220, Education 531, and just let all that other stuff go and take a few moments of absolute silence to compose ourselves. It's uncomfortable at first, there's no question about that, but it's novel enough in our lives that students often ask for longer periods of silence, and I figured out it's not actually because they don't want me to start teaching. They're trying to delay the class and the dissemination of my wisdom. They don't have silence in their lives, and this is a way for them to harness their thoughts. So those are some sort of specific examples of hooks or anticipatory sets, things you can do relatively low prep in the first couple of minutes before you launch into your whole lesson. A couple of tools I'd like to leave you with are really sets of questions that and I didn't make these up. I've stolen all of my good ideas. One is from the realm of multiple intelligences theory that Howard Gardner has disseminated over the last 20 years. And he taps into the idea that there's lots of ways of thinking about things, and there's lots of ways of being smart. And so he encourages teachers to ask themselves questions as they're planning lessons, and I think this applies to anticipatory sets. Questions like, if this concept that I'm about to teach had a musical soundtrack, what would that be like? And the answer to that question might give you some clues about music you could tap into. When I think about the idea of participatory democracy, what colors or images or metaphors come to my mind? That's a way of tapping into visual spatial intelligence. What kinds of lists or numbers or hypotheses, educated guesses? If I'm in a literature class, I might ask students, what might have happened if the friar had turned up 15 minutes earlier in the crypt in the play Romeo and Juliet? And that's tapping into a logical, mathematical way of thinking, which some students are really adept at, and those might be the very students that are disengaged when we go at things completely verbally or completely linguistically, completely pictorially. But that series of questions, if this concept had a soundtrack, what might it be? What kinds of images and colors come to my own mind as I ponder this? What kinds of logical problems does this concept present? How might I engage students' own memories and own personal experiences? That's tapping into the power of intrapersonal intelligence. How might I get them talking very briefly to one another? Because sometimes students need a chance to try out or rehearse an idea that they've been reading about in your class or that you'll be talking about in a bigger group context. And I might be much more willing to share my idea with someone who's sitting 18 inches away from me in a soft voice than I would to take that on the road and share it in front of an entire class. But if you take a couple of minutes and ask me to turn to somebody and just say in 3 sentences, what were your reactions to the reading for the week, or what are 3 problems you have with the thesis that we're tackling in today's class, you'd be surprised at how that can boost the participation a little bit later. And it takes no preparation on your part. It also gets students thinking and reading and writing and speaking and listening. That's 5 modes of engagement that probably are going to pay great dividends in the rest of the session that day. So multiple intelligences and questions around that are one tool that can be really helpful in prompting your own thinking. And then another tool that I tap into a lot is from the realm of neurobiology, how our brain functions. And we have at any given time maybe 10,000 bits of data that are assaulting our senses, things that we could be paying attention to. And we are only going to pay attention to the things that we're led to believe we should pay attention to, or that somehow by their quality capture our attention. And there's a handful of qualities of data that make our brains stop and pay attention for a few seconds, which is all we need in a really effective hook. And those are qualities such as intensity, so using color in deliberate ways, or bright colors, so that information stands out from other things that are around it. That would be one tool if you're thinking about putting things on the board or on a screen. Images that are intense, that are much bigger than the things around them, that are perhaps much smaller, things that are really loud we pay attention to, but we also pay attention to things that are very, very soft because we have to focus to listen to those things. Incongruity or novelty, something that's really unexpected. I mean, some instructors will go so far as to show up in costume or a partial costume, a mask, an ascot, a pipe, something that students are not expecting, or dressing up as a student. That's sort of on the high level of investment in incongruity or novelty. But just doing something that's a little unexpected. And as I mentioned earlier, silence is something at the university in the 21st century, I think, that has been very unexpected for students and very appreciated in terms of helping them center and helping them switch mental gears for what we're about to undertake. And then, of course, personal significance. Nobody comes into our classes with being a total empty picture or a blank slate. There's really no such thing. No matter how complicated the concept is that you're teaching, people have personal experiences that somehow tap into these ideas. And if they wouldn't, if they didn't have that prior knowledge or that that potential for being personally touched by stuff, we probably wouldn't teach it. We probably wouldn't think it's worth the time that we spend preparing a lecture or seeking out good films or creating learning activities around that. So anything you can do to ask yourself, what might be some analogical experiences that students have that are analogous somehow to the concept that we're going to be teaching today. And you can say that out loud to students. I want you to take 30 seconds and jot down three ways you've been cheated in your life. I want you to write down 3 ideas that you have encountered in your life that blew your mind as you're about to take them into an investigation of the 4th dimension or quantum physics. So I think just in closing, I would say we can have 49 brilliant minutes of lecture prepared. We can have 75 brilliant minutes of lecture prepared. But if students haven't been cued that what's coming up is important because it's important and interesting and engaging and compelling, it's not important solely because it's going to be on the test at the end of at midterms or at finals. If our only reason for getting them to pay attention is it's going to be on the test, we need to rethink that. And I hope that I've given you a few tools for thinking about how you could spend up to 1 minute really effectively that changes the whole tenor of the subsequent class. Those are hooks and anticipatory sets.